There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. Now, I'm going to assume that all of you listening really want to make a positive impact on the world, and I'm betting that each of you have causes you really care about. Mine happens to be, at the moment, homelessness. And no doubt you have your own. It might be related to climate, related to disease, related to some other cause, even supporting a local business environment, or even supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs. So beyond just making a charitable contribution, what we want to ask today is how can you use your money to create the kind of change that you want to see happen? And especially if you don't have huge amounts of it to give away. So surprisingly, there are some very accessible ways for almost anyone to invest in a cause or in a company that they care about. So my guest today is Marcia Dawood. She's an early stage investor, and she serves on the Securities and Exchange Commission's Small Business Capital Formation Advisory Committee. Phew, that's a mouthful. She's a venture partner with Mindshift Capital. She's a member of Golden Seeds, and she's the chair emeritus of Angel Capital Association. Translate, Marcia's spending a lot of time looking at ways to invest in underrepresented groups or in interesting causes. More importantly for today, she's the author of Doing Good While Doing Well, Invest for Change, Reap Financial Rewards, and Increase Your Happiness. She's a producer of an award-winning documentary called Show Her the Money. And if that's not enough, she's a TEDx speaker and host of a podcast called The Angel Next Door. And Marcia actually had a corporate career before investing in all of this angel investor stuff. But we're going to stay focused today on how do you do good while doing well. Marcia, welcome to the conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Wanda.
I have to say I really did enjoy the book and was surprised by how much advice was in it to kind of lead people through. But before I kind of get diving into this, so the premise we're talking about is that you can be an angel investor and put your money on a cause that you care about or supporting an entrepreneurial group that you want to support. But Marcia, for you, why does this matter? What got you started in this whole area?
Yeah. So in 2012, I had no idea what angel investing was. I was invited to a meeting and my first question was like, what is it? Is it like a investing group with stocks? Like I had absolutely no idea. And I went to the first meeting and I saw a few of the local entrepreneurs talking about the companies that they were building, all private companies. And most of them were spun out of local university. I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, so Carnegie Mellon had a lot of interesting entrepreneurs working there, and then they would try to commercialize their companies after that. And so that's kind of the stage where we were looking at these various companies, and I was just so fascinated at how much innovation was happening right in my own backyard. Like you had mentioned, I did work in corporate America for quite a long time, and we were kind of doing the same thing and expecting different results and not really getting anywhere. And I just started seeing all of these really interesting founders who were working on things I had never even thought of before. And I thought, wow, I could be a part of this. So over the next, several years, I got more involved. I started to look at more companies. I started to mentor a little bit and help out where I could. I made a couple of investments. And then between 2010 and 2020, I ended up living in 5 different cities: New York, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Dallas, and now I live in Charlotte, which gave me an interesting vantage point as far as entrepreneurship around the country. And there are entrepreneurs in every city and every town. But I got to a point where I was like, well, I'm kind of out of capital that I can personally use. I don't have billions of dollars like you see on TV. So I thought, well, what's the problem here? Like, why are these founders having such a hard time raising money? And a lot of it is because a lot of people just have no idea that they can even participate. It's not that they don't want to, they just have no idea. We have a huge awareness problem. So that's really where the book, the podcast, all those things came in, because I thought if I can just demystify this a little bit, I think people would feel more comfortable. They wouldn't think it was so daunting, and they might just jump in and get involved.
Well, I have to say, I know Golden Seeds because we have a mutual friend who's on Golden Seeds, and Golden Seeds really supports female entrepreneurs. And it's a lovely organization, a lovely process, kind of helping them get from early stages into some more stability. So, classic angel investing. But until I read your book, I had no idea how accessible this was. I mean, because I've not been exposed to that other than through Golden Seeds. So give me the pitch. Why should I spend my money on that?
Well, it's like anything. If you're interested and you want to be a part of making change in the world, and you wanted to invest in an early stage company, back in the day, that was very difficult to do unless you were invited. You had a lot of money. You could write very large checks. I'm talking like, to get into a venture capital fund several years ago, and it wasn't even that long ago, you really had to be able to write $250,000 to $1 million check. And that is just obviously not accessible. And so being able to invest through things like equity crowdfunding, which I talk about in my book, for as little as $50 is something that becomes much more accessible if you have just an internet access and a bank account. So, if people are interested in making change in the world, a lot of times people think about donating to charity, and which is fantastic. And I encourage everybody to donate to charity. But if you look at the amount of money that's donated to charity each year, that's about $475 billion annually here in the US. Well, that is equivalent to about 1% of the value of the US stock market. So if you think about how much money goes to charity, and we're putting the burden on charities to solve like all the world's problems, cure cancer, clean up the environment, the earth, all of those things are being put on the nonprofits. That's not reality, and that's not fair to them. So how can we do things that can enhance, and we can work together with nonprofits, and we can get more investment dollars into for-profit companies so that we can get to see the change that we want to see in the world?
Yeah, I happen to everybody has their own personal opinion about it, but for me personally, the problem with donating to charity, and I do that, is that you have to write another check again next year. And
That's
the year
right.
after, and the year after, and the year after. Those checks don't have a way of generating more of their own income. When I'm investing in an entrepreneur that's tackling the same problem in a way I sort of believe in, then that has the potential over some period of time to actually begin to generate revenue and begin to solve bigger problems along the way. So to me, that appeals. I guess everybody makes up their own mind, or as you so rightly say, do both.
Right.
Okay, so walk me through the ways to invest. You just said equity, but you talk about so many different ways. Walk us through all the different ones and kind of what they look like.
Right. So a traditional angel investor, if you were going to join a traditional angel group, and there are angel groups pretty much in every city and every town. If you just went to, an online search engine and just said, hey, angel groups in, and filled in your city or town, you'd be able to find them. And that's when you would make an investment by writing a check, and you would get a portion of ownership of the company, and that would be equity. However, over the last several years, there have been more and more ways to invest a little bit differently. One, so that you can start to diversify your portfolio, which I'm a huge fan of. This is a risky asset class. I always tell people, these are early companies. They're private companies. They have a lot of ups and downs. It's very hard to build a company, and some of them don't make it. And that's just the reality of it. So diversifying your portfolio, meaning that you put like a lot of bets on the table, basically. You're investing in several different companies in order to get to make sure that if a couple of them don't make it and a couple of them do, then you kind of like even out and win in the end. That's the idea. So nowadays, like I mentioned before, you had to have like millions of dollars before to invest in a venture capital fund. But now angel groups like Golden Seeds have annual funds or smaller funds where the check sizes are much more approachable. And that's another way that you can write one check and you could get exposure to, let's say, 10 or even 15 different companies. So I'm a huge fan of that. But there's other ways as well. So debt crowdfunding, for example, or even equity crowdfunding is where kind of like Kickstarter, or a lot of people lately especially have been using GoFundMe. That's like getting the crowd to kind of pool all their money together in order to help a cause. This is very similar, except now you're going to get, if you do equity crowdfunding, you'll get a small, very small piece of ownership in the company. But I'm really so curious about what's happening now with debt crowdfunding, because that's a way that like even somebody who wanted to have a coffee shop or like a dry cleaner or local business, they could get the local community to invest in the business, but they would get paid back in using like a debt instrument as opposed to this equity and then having to wait until they actually would sell the business. And sometimes, with a Main Street business, you wouldn't have that scalability that you would see in a startup. So I think that that's an interesting way that people can invest and help their local community. And you could be like an investor in your local coffee shop where you go every day for breakfast. I think that's really kind of cool. And with just a little bit of money, we're not talking like, thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars or anything like that. And then the other thing that really is not talked about very much is the idea of using philanthropic dollars, so the dollars that you would give to charity, in the meantime, to let those dollars go to work for a for-profit company. It's a little complicated, but not really. So you would take those dollars, you would get your tax deduction, but in the meantime, before it would end up at the charity, the 501c3, those dollars would be used in a for-profit company in order to hopefully build that into even more dollars. So like you were saying, every year you got to write another check whenever you're donating charity. Here you could take your charitable donations, use them toward a for-profit company, and hopefully that would build into more and more dollars as it's in that account. It would come back to your account. Now, obviously not back to you personally and your checking account or anything, but it would come back to your donor advised fund or whatever account platform you're on that does this. And then you could say, okay, I'm now going to take the profits from that, and I'm either going to invest in another for-profit company, and this has been really helpful for underrepresented founders, women, people of color, all that. Or you could say, hey, now I have more dollars that I can go give to other charities. So it's a really, really cool way. And again, awareness problem, I have it listed and talked about in the book. And I've talked to a couple of people who've read the book who are already angel investors who know about the space. And they said, you know what? I didn't know about that. I didn't know you could do that.
And a lot of these are new things
Yeah.
that have come across in the last 3 to 5 years. I think there's been change in regulations that have made this easier. I also remember hearing about, and it's in your book too, a crowdfunding where I would agree to buy a future product.
Right.
So that's an interesting version too. How common is that one, Marcia?
That's actually been around probably the longest. You can think of like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. So if somebody's building something, or I see people use it for like films and other types of the arts, where they would say, hey, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to make this, but I don't have the money to manufacture it or put it together or film it or whatever it is. And they say, how about if I can get everybody interested in it, and then you put up the money or you buy it in advance or whatever it is, then that money can be used in order to develop the product. And then at the end, you get like the first look, which is always kind of cool. You get the product before anybody else. And you usually get it at a discount because you're having to wait. Yeah. I really do love those sites for so many reasons. First of all, it really does help entrepreneurs kind of validate what they're doing. So like if they have this idea and they're like, hey, do I think people will buy it? Well, try it. I mean, before you go spending all this money making it and all that kind of stuff, put up a Kickstarter campaign and see what people say. Will they buy it? Will they buy it in advance? Will they buy it at a discount? What's the pricing? You can kind of figure all that out. But then at the same time, you have the marketing of, hey, I'm doing this, and you tell everybody about it, and they kind of get on board. Now they're kind of invested in what you're doing, even though they didn't invest in your company. They have like a reason to really cheer you on and get you to the point where you have that great product. And now they're so excited when they get it and they get to try it before anybody else, and they're going to put it on social media. So like the buzz kind of just rolls through. And I really, really think it's a great idea for especially any founder that's trying something out or has some kind of a product that they're just not 100% sure yet about how to build it or how to scale it.
Or what features people are going to like, or, a whole range of things that you might want to test and say, does this really work the way I think it works? I can think of a bunch of startup companies that would have been smarter doing that than the route that they went down, because it would have given them users who would have given them real-time feedback faster than they can get any other way. Okay, so we got tons of different ways, from debt funding to equity funding, taking a piece of the company, to early products, to using our funds for that are going to charitable donations to invest and to make those donations larger. I mean, we've got so many different ways. But let's go back to the kind of the classic one, the notion of the equity funding. Walk me through the process. Like, how does this? What are the steps along the way?
So typically, what I love about angel groups or even funds is it's the wisdom of the crowd, of the group. I love companies that are working in healthcare and trying to help cure diseases and all kinds of things. But I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. So I am not the person that should be evaluating these companies and saying, oh, yeah, this is definitely going to work, because I don't have that level of expertise. However, when I'm in a group or working through a fund, those people we can find that level of expertise that we need in the group for a particular company that we're looking at. And everybody kind of brings their own level to the conversation as we're evaluating a company. Because I know there's sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that you're going to be able to help, with the treatment for whatever it is. And then, so I'm like all in, and I'm like, oh, I'd love to invest in you. And then I'm like, I hear from the experts, whatever. And maybe that isn't really the best investment for our group or to make that investment. But let's say that it is. And we go through a diligence process. That usually takes somewhere between, I'd say 2 to 4 months maybe, because we're evaluating each part of the company, the team, especially. That's super important. So we want to be able to see like who's running the company, who's going to be able to grow the company. Founders are an interesting breed. A lot of times they are really, really visionaries and they're incredible at what they're trying to build, but they need that operations person. So some of the best teams I've seen are when you have that visionary person who's really gung-ho, and then you also have that executor who can just get everything done. And I think that when you look at a team like that, that's super important. And that's one of the things that we're really looking at to see, can they take this to the end? Can they get an exit? Can they actually be able to sell the company, or, however they're going to get a liquidity event. And so just as a side note, the reason why this is a risky asset class is because of the illiquidity of it. I mean, yes, it's risky because sometimes the companies go out of business, but it's also risky from the standpoint, like, I wouldn't want to have people put in their kids' college fund money into an early stage investment, because, well, what happens when their kid wants to go to college and the money's tied up?
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with the whole aspect of liquidity. And I think that's something that, we really look at in the diligence process. So we're looking at the team, we're looking at how long do we think it's going to take before this company can actually get to some type of a liquidity event where they're bought or absorbed into another company. And then what is it that is really going to get them to scale? I think that's like, people ask me all the time, like, what's the difference between a startup and any other business? There's lots of small businesses all throughout the country, but what's kind of the biggest difference? And that's the main thing. It's that scalability. Can the company really get it so that lots of customers are really wanting the product? Are they solving a big problem, or are they just kind of a solution in search of a problem? Yeah. So you go through the diligence process, and then at that point, if everybody agrees on everything and the terms are, I mean, and believe me, there's always something to say no to, right? So you kind of have to take the good, you kind of make your list of pros and cons. And, that's all through like a formal memo, a deal memo that we would put together as a group. And then you would make an investment. And sometimes that investment would be through a fund, like we talked about, where I love annual funds, like where everybody kind of puts in money at the beginning of the year, and then you can kind of vote on the companies you want to see, you want to invest in throughout the year. Or in some cases, a very traditional way to do angel investing is you would just have people write a check directly into that company that they were looking at. So those are the options.
All right. I just want to underscore, I can't tell you how, several entrepreneurial businesses that I have been associated with or aware of or worked in or with or some variation on the theme. And you always find the entrepreneur, the founder with these brilliant ideas, as you so rightly said, who gets bored when it comes to scale or execution, and they're ready for the next new thing. And if you can't put a bridle on them at that moment, they may have another new thing that's really brilliant, but you just never really get this to the place you need to do to have the value come back from the business. So yes, all important things to do. All right. So how much money do I really need to invest?
Well, that all depends. I usually like the rule of you don't want to put more than 5 to 10% of your investable assets into alternative assets. So alternative assets would include angel investing. It would include art. It could include other things that are not real jewelry, things that aren't necessarily, again, super liquid. Super liquid to me is you go to E-Trade or Robinhood and you're able to get in and out of the public market stocks really quickly. If you wanted to be somebody who like bought a stock and then 5 minutes later you wanted to sell the stock, you could. It's totally fine. You might make or lose money, but that's neither here nor there. You can do it. So when I talk to people about, well, how much money do I need? It really just depends on the person and how much they feel that they want to put into an asset class like this. And like I said, 5 to 10% of your investable assets is usually a good number. And so I think that if what I love about equity crowdfunding and these ways that people can get in for $100, $250 or whatever it is, I love that because it's a great way to learn. And you don't have, I had to learn in a very traditional angel model where I was writing bigger checks. And then I got to a point where I was like, whoa, I can't, this is not sustainable. I cannot do this. I would have like, at one point I had like 2 companies in my portfolio. That's not diversification. So, I love the idea that people can make a couple of investments. They can watch what happens with the companies. They can kind of see like, they can learn a little bit and really get to know before they make that big jump. We always used to say, hey, watch for like 6 months before you start making investments. But then you fall in love with the founder and you're like, oh, I have to invest in them. I love them so much. And then you just have to say, okay, we're just going to learn for a little while and then go. But there's so many ways now that you can do that. On the equity crowdfunding sites, there's so much information on there, especially in the comment section. So I really encourage people, if you want to start to look at some early stage companies, just to get a sense for what are they doing and watch the video and then read the comment section. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So do you have any favorite equity crowdfunding sites, for example, to get started? You mentioned a couple earlier, but I'm interested in your favorites.
Yeah. So for equity crowdfunding, so there's Kickstarter, Indiegogo. Those are like rewards based. You've got GoFundMe, which is donation based. And then the equity crowdfunding, the 3 that have the market share right now are WeFunder, Start Engine, and Republic.com. Now, I've had somebody from each of those. I had the CEO of Start Engine and Republic on my podcast, so you can hear all about that. And I also had Justin Renfrew from WeFunder. So I think they all have their own kind of niche in the market. I think personally that Republic.com's interface is very user-friendly. And I also like how they have categories. So they do have a category for women-led businesses, which I love. And you can go and, just again, the browsing is very, very simple. It's really simple on any of the sites, but I particularly like the user interface there.
All right. So WeFunder, Start Engine, Republic are the three big ones for equity funding that people can get into.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when I'm thinking about it, and are there any other sources that you recommend people look at just to get themselves educated about other than your book and your podcast? The book is Do Good While Doing Well, and the podcast is The Angel Next Door. Any other sources you recommend?
Yeah, so we talked really briefly about debt crowdfunding. There's a site called Honeycomb Credit, and actually their founder is George Cook is on the SEC advisory committee with me, and I just think he brings such a unique perspective, and it's such an interesting site. So that's another one that has a nice user interface. People can learn, they can look around, and they don't necessarily have to invest right away.
Okay. This is a lot to remember. So I've got ways to crowdfund, so Kickstarter and Indigo. I've got ways to make charitable donations to causes. That's a GoFundMe usually. I've got equity funding, so I'm going to get a piece of ownership back. WeFunder, Start Engine, Republic, and I've got debt funding. Honeycomb is the place. And each of those sites will have lots and lots of information about their companies, individual companies, as well as resources for you to peruse. Okay.
Yes. They're all very good about having educational and materials.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Now, what do I need to think about? What are the best practices in getting myself prepared? So I'm going to spend some time. I'm going to look around. Of course, everybody's going to fall in love with a cause or a person or a company, maybe wisely, maybe not so wisely. But how do I get myself prepared to make the best investment?
Yeah. So, of course, my book and podcast has a lot of information, but you can go to my website and for free, you don't have to have the book. You don't really need anything. You can download what I call the Halo Strategy Worksheet. It's just one page. There are 5 exercises on it, and it really starts to get you to think about, well, what is it that I care about? And you make a little list. What are the things that I'm good at? What could I bring to a company? What kind of expertise do I have? And sometimes people think, well, I have to have a finance degree. I have to be able to, know all these things about investing. No. That is absolutely not true. If you had, let's say, experience in human resources, or let's say that you had experience with bookkeeping, or really anything that has to do with business, everybody has some kind of expertise that they could bring to help a startup. Building a company is hard work, and there's a lot that goes into it. So if somebody has, really any time that they might want to just start to get to know different companies, learn a little bit before they start putting money in, totally acceptable. And entrepreneurs love to have some advisors or mentors, especially if there's an alignment about what they're doing and what type of expertise somebody has. And, there's just always something that you can do there. And then also just thinking about, well, how does this fit into my overall investment strategy, my overall money strategy, because you really can't start to think about how am I going to make investments and how am I going to be an angel investor or how I'm going to invest in these startup companies until you start to think about, well, wait a minute, what's my relationship to money? How do I feel about risk and reward? And those are some of the things that I walk through in my workbook that goes along with the book, more about like relationship to money, talking to your family about money, all those things. But on this one particular worksheet that you can just download for free off my website, you can go through these couple of exercises, and then that'll get you started in thinking, okay, well, now I feel like I could look around and maybe I would look at a equity crowdfunding site, or maybe I would, think about using philanthropic money to invest or something like that.
Okay. All right. So let's say I'm looking around on any of these sites that you've mentioned, and I found a couple, 3 companies that I would like to support. Okay, maybe I make some donations to support them, maybe, or give some money to support them, and maybe not. How do I volunteer my services to those entrepreneurs? Whatever I think my talents are that I might want to use towards that cause.
If you were going to do that on the site, you could message the founder. It's very easy to send messages back and forth to the company through the site, especially if you become an investor. But probably the number one thing I would do if somebody was thinking, hey, I would like to maybe help a founder, help a startup company, is go to some of the local events that are happening in your area. Don't necessarily immediately go to something that's online. I only say that because there are so many things happening in every city and every town. So why not be right in your backyard and find out what's going on there and get to meet people in person? And, now since COVID, I feel like everything's online, and like, how do we get that human connection again? And so I would really encourage people just to find out what's going on. There are probably some kind of like entrepreneurial events or startup events, a pitch competition, something like that that's happening. And you can just go and start to see what's going on.
Right. And how do I find those events? Is it just a search on
simple search, like
simple search,
startup events in, and then just
right,
fill in your city or town. Yeah.
Startup events. Okay. And so I'm looking at a place where founders might come and pitch an idea to a room full of people, where there'll be other people like me who are thinking about looking at those sorts of portfolios, ask them questions about how they evaluate how much they've been invested, all those sorts of things. And to do that, and then also to consider what skills I might have that would be useful to any founders, especially ones that I invest in. Because I think that's the win-win. I'm investing in the company. I want to see it succeed. And now I'm going to do something that actually helps accelerate them, kind of not for pay, but for helping the company move forward.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So the Halo Strategy Worksheet, and that's on your website. And what's your website address?
Just my name, marciadawood.com.
Okay, perfect. And I know that the workbook that goes with the book, Doing Good While Doing Well, is on Amazon or any of your other regular books providers, not just Amazon. It's not the only one in the world.
That's right.
Sometimes we forget that one. Okay. So do you have any other best practices? So you said we should look around. We should do some due diligence. We should meet people. We should talk to other potential investors. We think about all the different ways of investing. Are there any other practices that you find are just really useful?
Mm-hmm. I would say, just get involved. I mean, you don't have to know everything. Sometimes it does seem a little bit daunting. Oh my gosh, do I have to learn about addressable market and competition for a company, all those types of things. Just getting in the room, talking to people, learning, that's just doing it, just kind of jumping in. And that doesn't mean you have to write big checks right away. That could come later, but just being able to learn about it. I wish I had taken a couple steps back in the day when I was first invited. I just thought, oh dear, like I guess this is how you do this, and I didn't really have a lot of guidance as far as, hey, wait or look around. And there certainly weren't things that you could look at online. So.
Yeah, a lot more information is accessible, and there are so many more instruments for doing the investing as well. So certainly there are the financial rewards of investing in these startup businesses, but you talk about a whole range of other rewards to consider. So what are those things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah. So the biggest one for me personally is just how many other people I got to meet that were completely outside of my industry that I had been working in for so many years as I was working in the corporate world. And I just got to a point where I was like, okay, my husband golfs a lot. And I would get a little annoyed that this sport takes so long. And I don't understand why it can't be the same amount of time as a yoga class, but hey, but then I started to realize, wait a minute, I'm not really upset that he's golfing. I'm more like, hey, you get to meet some really interesting people that you would never meet unless you were on the golf course. Okay. So should I play golf? No, I should not play golf because I have very bad hand-eye coordination. And I'm not good at golf. Okay. So that's not for me. But how can I find my golf course? And that's really how I got so passionate about angel investing, because I kept meeting all these people and I thought, wow, this is really cool. I get to learn about different people's background, their industry. I met new friends, got invited to different things. It just kind of became like my golf course, and I really loved that piece of it. Another part of it is just knowing that you're helping a cause. So in my TEDx talk, I talk a lot about this company that I ended up investing in that is working on a treatment for Alzheimer's disease. My mother unfortunately passed away from ALS. It's a sister disease to Alzheimer's. And I was passionate about that. I was passionate about helping. And I thought to myself, you know what? Sometimes when you make an investment like this, you're thinking, I really want them to be able to find something to make some progress. If this particular company doesn't necessarily make it, but they are able to make enough progress so that it can be carried on in some other way, I would still feel like I had won. So maybe I don't get the financial return. Jury's still out, could still happen, but those are the kind of things. Of course, we want a financial return. That's not the point. We're not saying, oh yeah, this is just all for a donation. That's absolutely not the case. We do want a financial return, but knowing that you can get that emotional reward as well. And then the other thing I just say is what we were talking about with the first look. We talked about it with a Kickstarter, but when you're an investor, you get to see all the stuff, which is really cool. So, getting to see that ahead of time, getting to try products ahead of time, all of those things are, kind of the perks.
Yeah. I think if you haven't spent much time in the entrepreneurial world, particularly, as you say, in your local community, who's doing what around here, it's kind of inspiring, the ideas that people have come up with and the ways in which they're approaching solving a particular problem. Because you would never hear about them. They're not going to make the news for a really long time. And I think even large companies don't necessarily know what innovations are happening in their space until it's a big deal and they're looking to buy it. So I just think it's inspiring
It is.
all the different things people are doing.
And I'll also add that I've talked to so many people who are still working in the corporate world who say that once they get involved in angel investing, it has opened their mind to think differently in their roles in corporate America. And I just think that's so fascinating. I love that because they come to their corporate job, which is usually like in a pretty big company and things like that, but they come with that entrepreneurial mindset now, and they start to have a lot different results inside of their company. So it's like a little bit of an intrapreneur, as we call it. So I love hearing about that too.
Great. Do you have any stories you can share? You don't have to name people's names, but I'm just curious about how that plays out for individuals in corporate roles.
Yeah, I mean, just being able to take the information, like, so for example, if you're on a diligence team, you're learning about all of these pieces of what makes a startup company work. You're thinking about everything, the addressable market. You're thinking about the competition. You're thinking about how the team works together. Do you have that visionary and the executor? Do you have the person who's going to be able to do sales and things like that? So let's say that you're in the corporate world and you have one job and that's the only thing that you're really thinking about for your company, and you're kind of in this like narrow pathway with that. But now you've been seeing like a startup company, for example, if you're on this diligence team and you're evaluating the whole piece, now when you come back to your role, you're thinking, well, maybe if I thought about how the sales team was going to work with what I'm doing or the marketing or how, whatever the situation is, now all of a sudden you've expanded your horizons because you're taking what you learned from the small version and putting it into action in this bigger corporate space.
Even just asking the question of who would buy this thing that we're doing, this piece of this thing that I'm providing in the corporate world, who would buy it? Why would they buy it? How much would they pay for it? And who else is offering something out there that's similar? Just that mindset alone is going to put you leap years ahead from a strategic thinking point of view. So everybody out there who's trying to develop your strategic thinking, I think I have a new solution for you, which is go get involved in some angel investing and evaluate these entrepreneurial firms. So how much time does it take? I mean, I can go on any one of these websites and pick a company, donate money, sit back, not do anything, but I think you're advocating to be a little smarter than that. So on average, how much time am I spending on this?
Again, my answer is it completely depends. There are some people that have absolutely no time. And in those cases, I would say you want to get with somebody who is working on a fund. That way you get diversification. You can make an investment. Somebody else is going to make the decision. Somebody else is going to do the diligence work. You can watch from the sidelines. You'll get reports. But if you do not have time, then that's totally fine. All the way up to, I've seen people who they work with entrepreneurs all day, every day. So, and everything in between. So I really think it's just a personal mission. And that's part of what's on the Halo strategy worksheet too. Also makes you think about, well, how much time do I have and how much time would I want to put toward this? And if the answer is 0, that's okay too. It doesn't mean you can't be involved. What I love about funds as well is that a lot of times they're very focused. So you could say, well, I really care about healthcare, and you could invest in a fund that's what they're working on. They're working on advances in healthcare. Or you could say, I'm really passionate about climate, and you could find a fund like that. So again, it's just kind of finding what is in your particular investment thesis, or what I call your Halo strategy.
Which is why coming back to some of the questions that you have on your Halo worksheet is really useful. Like, why am I doing this? What's the cause that I want to support? What are my values here? What's my time? What are my skills? Some of that background work that helps you understand where you want to channel your energy. Because otherwise, I think there's so many options, you could get lost, and you either are then just a random pick or overwhelmed and don't do anything. So I think that's right. I really do like that approach. And it's in the book as well, but it's also on the website, marciadawood.com, Halo Strategy Worksheet. Okay, I want to now go back to the traditional portfolio. So most of us have some sort of retirement investings in some capacity. Are there ways to direct my financial advisor or to be focused on the traditional funding that I use to be sure that it's going to support causes that I care about?
Do you mean your retirement savings and your kids' college fund? How could I put that? Yes. So I actually mentioned it briefly in the book, but there's a woman named Janine Firpo who wrote a book called Activate Your Money. And I love this book because it talks about every single aspect of your money and how you can align it with your values. And that would be making sure that any stocks or mutual funds or ETFs that your 401k or IRA are invested in, or anything in a brokerage account, making sure that aligns. Do you really know what a lot of these companies are investing in, and does it align with your values? That's one. Another one would be where do you bank? And is it one of the big guys, or do you have a regional bank or some type of a credit union? There's a lot of places out there that really support local businesses. So just learning about that. But the biggest one is where we spend our money. Do you know if there's a local dry cleaner that's owned by, let's say, a woman or a person of color, that you could go to that dry cleaner instead of another, all of those types of things. And the way that we think about how we spend our money could be, a real game changer of being able to help support some of these amazing businesses that are out there that really are just struggling because they aren't either getting funding or they just aren't getting the exposure.
Yeah. It's a really good point to think about where I spend my money and the practices of the company, their treatment of employees, their sourcing of goods. Do they source it from locals? Do they source it from small businesses? Is it massively shipped? What are the transportation costs? There's a lot of questions you can ask. And interestingly, most large companies are paying more and more attention to that. And I find also some smaller organizations are paying a lot of attention to it and trying to distinguish themselves. But you got to stop to educate yourself. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I think there was an article several years ago about, I have a favorite T-shirt. It was a newspaper article. I have a favorite T-shirt, and I wanted to know where that T-shirt came from. And the person went on a journey to understand where every piece that made that T-shirt came from. That. It's a little bit, you would be surprised. And so I'm sure if you Google some version of that, you'll find other people who've done the same thing. But making sure you know where you spend your money. But I also think it's important. I'm hearing a lot more people say, I want to know who is in the fund that my retirement investments or my kids' college fund is in. And those are not always the easiest thing to find. So any advice there on how to figure out who's in it?
So there's a website, and Janine talks about it a lot more in her book. I mention it in mine, but it's called As You Sow, SOW, all spelled out as you, YOUSOW. And you can actually research different stocks, companies, funds on that website, and it will help you to understand kind of the beneath the curtain or behind the
That's really
curtain.
good.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know many of the large investment houses are starting to have sustainability funds. So funds that are focused on helping women solve women's problems and support women's businesses, funds that are focused on climate friendly. I mean, we're getting a lot of those different kind of investment portfolios available, but you can also look and see what are you actually really supporting in your retirement or kids' college funds savings. All right.
Yes.
What else do I need to know?
Well, that's a lot. So,
yes.
So I think just, knowing that it is accessible, it is doable, it doesn't have to be so daunting, and just being able to demystify what it means to try to help some of these companies that are really trying to make change in the world, and that you don't have to be a billionaire. You do not have to fly in a private plane. These are the things, there's so many myths. So I'm just out there to say, hey, these myths are not true. And don't think that you can't be invited to the table, because you can. And the way we're going to change the amount of funding, which is abysmal, going to women, people of color, especially women of color, we have to get more people in the room writing checks that look like those people. And that is where the change will start.
Change will start. Yes, I think the stats on how women startup businesses are funded is pretty bad. And if I add race or ethnicity or people of color on top of that, I make it even more difficult. And if I add a different country on top of that, I make it yet another level of difficulty. So yes, it's good to see that there are mechanisms for supporting. And I guess if there are people out there with ideas don't think they can get funding, maybe some of these other places are ways to go.
Absolutely.
All right, let me see if I can do a recap, Marcia. There's a lot of information in this one. But I'm going to start at one of the things that you said at the beginning is you want to think about what proportion of your investment portfolio you want to put in these kind of investments. And you never want more than 5 to 10% in general in any alternative investment portfolio, whether that's art or jewelry or whatever, a startup or any other version of that. That we have many different ways of investing. I can invest in equity crowdfunding so that I'm with a crowd and I'm going to get a piece of the company back, I'm assuming it does well. I can do in debt funding where I'm helping fund the debt of a local enterprise. I can do funding charitable nonprofit exercises. I can do, I can do a classic crowdfunding where I'm going to get an early product for testing. That there are lots of sites these days that serve up a portfolio of these. So things like Kickstarter, Indigo, GoFundMe, WeFunder, Start Engine, Republic, or Honeycomb are the ones that I wrote down that you mentioned. So go to those, look around, it's what's there. But that before you really start putting your money out there, you need to do some internal thinking. And this is where your book and the Halo strategy really comes into play. To think about what you care about how much money you can afford or want to put in, what that means for your family or not family, how much time you have to invest, and what skills you have that you might want to offer. So do some background so you've got a targeted place that you're going to start putting in money. How'd I do?
Great. And just to also mention, funding for equity is all things. So yes. Crowdfunding is, the very smallest dollar amounts. And then the traditional way is to invest either directly in the company with an angel group or through some type of a fund.
Right. And the amounts that I can invest are small. I think you say anywhere from 50, depending upon the platform that I'm choosing, all the way up to much larger sums if you choose to do that. Okay. And I also love the fact that you said you can use your skills. That is, you get involved, you can think about what skills you have to offer and how that is going to help the company. All right. Do you have a favorite investor story as an angel investor?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many amazing founders out there, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I'm passionate about getting other people to know about it, because I would just get so frustrated at seeing how hard it is for them to raise money. But one of the companies that I actually talk about in the book is a company called Joylux, and they're working on something very specific for women's health. And they've now even broadened that more to include lots of different things related to menopause, which I personally can attest to that we need. And I just really, I like this company so much because they are solving a problem that hasn't really been tackled in the way that they're doing it. But I also love the fact that the founder and the team there, they are very good at reading the market, knowing what they need to do in order to make sure that the company not just survives, like, for example, during COVID, when things got very, very hard for almost every company out there, but that they've really been able to thrive. And those are the types of stories that you love to hear about when, in the face of adversity, what is it that the company, the team, how do they rally together? How are they going to be able to really make something successful? And I'm super excited to see what's going to happen with them. They just announced recently, just in the last 2 weeks, a partnership with Halle Berry, who is also a huge advocate for menopause and what we can do in order to help make sure women are not suffering. So love that. And I just think there's a lot that's going to happen, especially in the whole industry, but especially with that company.
Great. And how many years have you been following this company or invested in this company?
We made our first investment in 2016.
So a long time.
A long time.
8 years. Mm-hmm. And is that a normal horizon to see a company really come through to success?
It is. It depends. I mean, I would love to say that it's usually not that long, but we remember we had a big pandemic in the middle of all this. So that did set back the time horizons. In 2022, 2023, we haven't been seeing that much acquisition activity. Mm-hmm. So that's made it hard for angels because they don't feel like they have any money because there's not a lot of liquidity events happening. I hope that in 2025, we're starting to see it pick up a little bit in 2024. I'm hoping in 2025, we're going to start to see more mergers and acquisition activity. We'll start to see more companies that are buying some of these other, smaller companies. And then you'll start to see the angels and the venture capitalists, have more capital to put back in the game. Right. The interest rates also help. I mean, we could have a whole podcast episode just on all that.
Yes, there's a lot in that one. Yeah. And I just want to echo 2 other things you said, which is to go to investor events, startup events. Just Google it in your local area, meet other people who are thinking about it, listen to what they have to say, read some things on some websites, whichever one you're choosing to focus on, get yourself smart about that, and meet other people, see what they're thinking about and talking about for the fun of that one as well. Okay. Wonderful discussion. Marcia, for 1 minute, what takes you out of your comfort zone and how do you survive?
Yeah, I think when I went to that first meeting, I was so out of my comfort zone. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, they're saying terms that I don't understand. They're throwing financial things around. And I just thought to myself, whoa, this is too much for me. This isn't for me. So I was definitely out of my comfort zone, but I quickly realized, you know what? There's other people here that don't really get all the things that some of the people are talking about. And I realized quite quickly that I could find my own comfort in that, especially since I was being surrounded by other people that would help me along. They knew I was new, so they didn't expect me to know everything. But you know what? I remember in one of those very first meetings, I asked a question and I thought to myself, oh, maybe I shouldn't ask this question because, I might sound, dumb or something like that. And actually everybody looked at me in the room and they said, oh, we didn't even think about that. So sometimes like this fresh perspective is also, even though I was outside of my comfort zone, I thought, oh, I'm going to ask anyway because I just don't get it. And all of a sudden they were like, oh yeah, we didn't think about that either. So, it's not always that you have to know every single thing.
That's right. I love this discussion. Again, the book is called Doing Good While Doing Well and subtitled Invest for Change, Reap Financial Rewards and Increase Your Happiness. I think, so it's unusual in this podcast when I'm talking about people in large corporations, how they would want to go and spend some of their private money and their private time. But I think you made a really good cause, a really good purpose here. So many times our causes in life are things we want to make a contribution to, but we can't afford to leave our day job. And this provides a way of doing that. But in addition, starting to see how businesses are formed, created, sustained, compete, make money, all of those things, and looking at other companies is going to help turn inward to you and your strategic thinking about your own job. So I'm going to argue it's solidly in that line of how to make you all better leaders in your current day job. Marcia, thanks for joining us. What a great conversation.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Wanda.
It's a pleasure. And join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.